Hey everyone! Before we dive into today's chilling tales, if you're a fan of spooky stories and love a good scare, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. And if you're ready to feel the goosebumps, go ahead and give this video a like. It really helps support the channel and lets me know you want more. Now let's get into the horror. This happened last year in late November. At the time, I was living in New York City for work, having moved from a small town upstate. In my hometown, everyone knew each other, and we were always reminded about staying cautious. After all, things could go wrong fast if you let your guard down. I carried that mindset with me when I moved to the city, always staying aware of my surroundings and avoiding sketchy areas, especially late at night. But nothing could have prepared me for the night I took a rideshare home. It had been one of those brutal days at the office. I'd been staring at a screen for hours, taking quick snacks from the vending machine, and somehow managing to push through the never-ending flow of emails and meetings. By the time I was ready to leave, it was close to midnight, and I was too tired to deal with the subway or a taxi. So I pulled out my phone and called a rideshare. The app connected me with a driver named Jack. His profile picture showed a middle-aged man with glasses, and he had decent ratings. The arrival time was quick, only about 3 minutes, so I waited inside the lobby of my building, staring out the window for his car to pull up. When the notification pinged that the driver had arrived, I stepped outside. A silver sedan was waiting by the curb. The license plate matched the app's details, and Jack waved as I walked over. I climbed into the back seat, mumbled a tired hello, and buckled up. The car smelled faintly of coffee, and jazz music played softly on the radio. Jack was polite, asking how my night had been, but I was too exhausted to chat. I just wanted to get home and collapse into bed. 5 minutes into the ride, I started to feel that something wasn't right. The route shown on my phone had us taking the highway, but Jack was driving down side streets. At first, I thought he might be avoiding traffic, but as we turned onto quieter and less familiar roads, I started to feel uneasy. I glanced out the window, trying to recognize something familiar, but everything looked unfamiliar. I leaned forward a bit. "Hey, is this a shortcut or something?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Jack didn't look back at me. "Yeah," he said in a flat tone, "some construction on the main road. This'll get us there faster." I nodded, trying to shake off the discomfort creeping into my chest. But something still didn't sit right. The app hadn't mentioned any construction. I didn't want to be that paranoid passenger, so I stayed quiet, watching the map on my phone. That's when I noticed it. The dot showing our car wasn't following any visible roads. The map was blank, a strange gray area, with no streets marked at all. My stomach dropped. "I think the app's confused," I said, forcing a laugh. "It's not showing any roads here." Jack didn't respond. This time, his grip on the wheel tightened. His posture stiffened. My heart rate quickened. I glanced at him, then around the car, but everything felt wrong. I suddenly felt trapped. "Hey," I said more firmly. "Where are we going? This isn't the way to my place." Finally he spoke, his voice calm but unnervingly cold. "I just need to make a quick stop first. Won't take long." I froze. Every alarm bell in my head went off at once. "No," I said, my voice trembling. "I need to go home now. Turn around." He didn't respond. The car kept moving, the headlights cutting through dark, empty streets. My mind raced, trying to figure out my options. I gripped my phone, considering whether I should call the police or try to jump out while the car was still moving. I had no idea where we were. "Let me out," I shouted louder this time. "I'll call the cops if you don't stop the car." Jack's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. The car slowed slightly as we turned onto an even darker street, bordered by tall, shadowy trees. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I realized that I didn't even know where I was anymore. Without thinking, I made a split-second decision. I unlocked the door, threw it open, and jumped out. The impact with the pavement was hard, and I rolled into the grass shoulder of the road. Pain shot through my arms and legs, but adrenaline kept me moving. I scrambled to my feet, heart racing, and started running into the trees, clutching my phone. Behind me, I heard the car screech to a halt. The driver's door slammed, and I heard Jack shouting something, but I couldn't make out the words. I didn't look back. I just ran as fast as I could, weaving through the trees, praying he wouldn't follow. I fumbled with my phone, dialing 911. My voice was shaking when the operator picked up. "I'm being followed," I gasped. "My rideshare driver, he's chasing me." The operator kept me on the line, asking for my location and details about the car. I ducked behind a fallen log, trying to catch my breath and listen for any sign of Jack. I couldn't hear him, but I wasn't about to take any chances. It felt like an eternity before I saw the red and blue lights flashing through the trees. The police had arrived. I ran toward the lights, trembling, barely able to speak. The officers quickly found me, and I was barely coherent as I explained what happened. They searched the area but didn't find Jack or his car. The next day, I contacted the rideshare company to report the incident. They told me that the driver's account didn't match the one I had been paired with. It was a fake account. Someone had intercepted the ride request, showed up in the right car, and taken me for a ride. I have no idea what his intentions were, but I'm thankful I managed to get away. I've switched to public transportation ever since, and now I double-check everything whenever I step into a vehicle. You never know what's out there, even if you think you're being careful. This happened in the summer of 1994. Back then, I co-owned a small convenience store and gas station in a sleepy town in New Jersey, a place most people wouldn't recognize. It wasn't the type of station that stayed open all night, but we did keep the doors open until 2 a.m. most days, just to catch the late-night traffic. On one of those quiet nights, I found myself manning the register by myself. It was just about 2:30 a.m., and there hadn't been a single customer in over an hour. It was one of those slow nights where you find yourself thinking about shutting up early. I was already starting to tidy up the shelves, getting the place ready to lock up for the night, when suddenly the chime of the door rang through the silence. I froze, instinctively walking toward the entrance to greet the customer. I wasn't expecting anyone, and at this hour, customers were rare. As I rounded the corner, I saw a tall man standing by the counter, his clothes covered in dark red stains. He was breathing heavily, like he'd just run a marathon. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice betraying the slight concern I felt seeing the bloodstains. He looked exhausted, his face pale under the fluorescent lights. He told me he'd been in a car crash. It seemed odd, considering he looked relatively unhurt, but I tried to stay calm. I told him we had a first aid kit in the back and that I could call an ambulance, but he refused immediately. "No cops," he insisted, his voice a little shaky. "Just show me to the bathroom." It struck me as strange. I pointed him toward the back of the store, where the small bathroom was tucked in the corner. As he walked away, I heard him muttering again, "No police, don't call them." I shrugged it off at first, figuring he was just in a bad situation and didn't want the authorities involved. But the more I thought about it, the more it nagged at me. He kept saying it, like he was trying to convince me not to call for help. Then it hit me. Despite the blood, I hadn't seen a single wound on his body. No cuts, no bruises, nothing that would explain the stains. And he was walking perfectly fine, moving like someone who hadn't just been in a wreck. My heart started pounding as I realized something was very off. I quickly stepped outside to the side of the building, where we had a payphone. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. A female dispatcher answered, and I explained what was happening in a low, nervous voice. How the man was still inside, in the bathroom, and how everything about him seemed wrong. The dispatcher was silent for a few seconds, and then she told me something that made my blood run cold. There had been a report of a stabbing homicide in a town just 15 miles away. The incident had been reported only half an hour before. "Can you give me a description of the suspect?" I asked, my voice trembling. The woman paused and then began listing the details. Tall, skinny, wearing gray sweatpants and a light-colored t-shirt. I felt my heart stop. I looked back at the store, and I could feel the fear starting to creep in. The man I'd just seen matched that description exactly. I asked the dispatcher to send officers immediately. She told me to get to my car and lock the doors, which I did without hesitation. Within 10 minutes, I saw a line of cop cars pulling up in front of the station. They came in fast, lights flashing, sirens blaring. I stood by my car as officers moved in, weapons drawn, entering the building. Another officer came over to take my statement, but we were interrupted by a sudden loud commotion from inside. The man in the bathroom had apparently jumped at one of the officers with a knife when they opened the door. Thankfully, he was overpowered quickly by the rest of the police, who tackled him to the ground. He was handcuffed and shoved into one of the patrol cars, his expression blank, as though he'd been expecting something like this to happen. I was still shaken, so I asked one of the officers what had happened. He filled me in. The man had injected himself with drugs, preparing to come out of the bathroom and attack me with the knife, then take off with the cash from the register. The whole thing had been planned. That night still sticks with me. I don't think I slept well for weeks after, and every time I think back on it, I can't shake the feeling of how close I came to being caught in something much worse. A decade later, curiosity got the best of me, and I did some digging into the guy's history. Turns out, he'd been the one responsible for the murder of a Dairy Queen employee in the town over. He was serving life in prison for that crime, along with a string of other offenses. To this day, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I hadn't trusted my instincts that night. I'll never forget the look in his eyes when he told me not to call the police. I've worked late hours since, but I've never felt that same sense of safety again. This happened in the summer of 2003, when I was 21 years old. I was living in a large, secluded house just outside of a small town in Maine with my parents. We had a pond in our backyard, and on the other side was a quiet park that most people never bothered to visit. Our property was pretty spacious, one of those places where the houses were spread out, making it feel peaceful, but also a little too isolated at times. At the time, I was in college and spent a lot of my free days alone at the house. My parents owned several properties, so they were often away, leaving me by myself in this huge place. It was summer, and I had a few days off from school, which meant I had some time to unwind. One evening, I was sitting in the sunroom, which was my favorite spot in the house during the warmer months. It was the coziest room, filled with natural light and a steady breeze that came through the open windows. I was curled up on the couch, watching TV, when I heard a splashing sound coming from the pond. At first, I thought it might be a goose or a duck. Those things made a lot of noise when they fought in the water. But as the splashing continued, I started to get curious. I turned down the volume on the TV to listen more closely. It didn't sound like the usual animal commotion. The splashes were too heavy, too rhythmic. I thought I could hear something else too, humming. It sounded like a man, and the idea that someone was in the pond at this hour immediately made me uneasy. I got up and stepped out onto the back deck, trying to get a better look. The night was pitch dark, and all I could see was the black outline of the pond. As I stood there, the splashing and humming stopped, almost like the person knew I was there. It was strange. I wondered if it was one of the neighbors going for an evening swim, but that didn't seem right. Nobody swam in that pond. It was too murky, and the water wasn't exactly inviting. Still, I didn't want to assume the worst. I decided not to confront whoever it was. I stepped back inside and flipped on the back deck lights, hoping to catch a glimpse. The lights illuminated part of the pond, and as soon as they came on, the splashing stopped entirely. Whoever was out there clearly saw me. I flicked off the lights again and locked the door, feeling a wave of unease wash over me. I quickly texted my brother, who was away at school, about what was going on. He didn't reply right away, but I tried not to let it get to me. The silence in the house was unsettling, though. I kept watching TV, but my mind wasn't really on the show. I couldn't stop looking out the window, but all I saw was more darkness. I didn't realize how much the TV light was revealing from the outside. Then suddenly, I thought I heard something move on the deck. I fumbled for the remote, turned off the TV, and sat still in the dark, waiting for my eyes to adjust. That's when I heard it, the sound of heavy breathing, right outside the window. I froze. The air seemed to thicken with tension. I laid flat on the couch, hoping whoever it was wouldn't notice me. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Then a deep voice broke the silence. "I see you." My stomach dropped. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't move. The words just tumbled out of my mouth. "Is that you, Paul?" Paul was one of our neighbors, and in my panic, I clung to the hope that maybe it was him, just messing with me. But the man outside didn't answer. Instead, I heard the sound of barefoot footsteps fading away, getting quieter until they disappeared. I stayed perfectly still, heart racing, unable to move. After a few minutes, I snapped back to reality and rushed to check the doors. I ran to the front door, checked it locked. The side entrance locked too. I felt a little bit better, but still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I texted my parents and the rest of my family, letting them know what was happening. My dad told me to turn on the backyard lights and check if anyone was still out there. He told me to be the man of the house and make sure everything was secure. I reluctantly followed his advice. I turned the lights on again, but this time I made sure to stay inside and peek out the window. The deck was clear, but just to be thorough, I grabbed a large knife from the kitchen, thinking I'd feel safer with it in hand. I stepped onto the deck cautiously, looking down at the ground. There, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A trail of wet footprints, partially dried, leading from the pond. They were unmistakably barefoot. I followed them around the side of the deck, my heart hammering in my chest. What I saw next still haunts me to this day. Just below the edge of the deck, peering up over the railing, were two eyes, staring right at me. The rest of the man's face was hidden, but those eyes, they were wide open, watching me. He'd been waiting for me to come out. We made eye contact, and without a sound, he turned and disappeared into the darkness. My body went into overdrive. I ran back inside, locked the door behind me, and immediately dialed 911. I didn't even bother telling my parents. I wasn't taking any chances. The police arrived quickly. I explained everything to them, and they did a sweep of the property. They didn't find anyone, and they didn't have any leads. They asked if we had any enemies or troublesome neighbors, but none of those questions helped. There was no explanation for what had happened. That night, I double-checked every window and locked every door before I finally fell asleep with the air conditioning running for extra peace of mind. When I woke up in the morning, the sunlight streaming in through the windows felt like a relief. I don't know who that man was or what his intentions were, but I do know that I've never been as comfortable being alone at that house again. That incident changed the way I look at being home by myself, always cautious, always aware. But to this day, I still wonder, was it a random stranger or someone I knew? And will he ever return?